Joanna, can you tell us how prevalent are eating disorders today?
Well, we know that about 1% of the population suffers from anorexia nervosa. That number has been estimated sometimes to be 1 to 3%, and about 3 to 5% of people suffer from bulimia nervosa.
And are we talking mainly girls and young women?
The numbers tend to be higher with girls and young women, but what we are discovering is that there are more boys coming forward with eating disorders, both anorexia and bulimia. And eating disorders do affect men. It's not as recognized, and I think there is still quite a bit of stigma around men and eating disorders, but it does exist and it is a problem.
What would you say are the main contributing factors then that would lead somebody to suffer from eating disorders?
It's such an interesting question because the reasons why someone gets an eating disorder are so varied. Usually there is some kind of a genetic predisposition. So maybe someone in your family suffers from eating disorders themselves, or other mental health concerns like depression, anxiety, substance abuse. But then usually what we find is that there's something in the environment that will trigger the eating disorder, and that could be anything. Sometimes it can be bullying at school. It can be someone who has been overweight in the past and wanted to lose the weight or got teased about it. It could be a death in the family, a move. Times around transition tend to be quite difficult for people with eating disorders. So almost every client that I see comes on a different path, and their eating disorder can often present in very, very different ways. It's quite unique for each individual.
So then what advice would you offer to parents in terms of what they should be potentially looking for? What are some signs that, are triggers potentially to an eating disorder?
Well, I think in younger children and adolescents, you're looking for changes in their regular behavior. So if you have a child who's normally eaten quite well and not had preoccupations around food, and suddenly you're noticing that they don't want to eat certain things, cutting out certain food groups, getting quite picky and fussy around food. An unexplained weight loss should always be looked into. And we know that dieting puts people at risk for eating disorders. So not encouraging dieting in your family, not being on a diet yourself as a parent so that your children are exposed to that, those are all good ideas.
It's interesting because I think there's probably not a mother who will be listening to this that hasn't thought the word diet, mention it in front of their children, and you do it innocently, right? It's not something that you think could potentially, who knows, right?
It's a very entrenched part of our culture. I think women often bond over hating their bodies. If you go to a party, it's always being talked about. But children pick up on this, and what we know is that children identify with their same-sex parent most closely starting in adolescence. So for girls, they are very closely watching their mothers. They're watching what their mothers do and say about their bodies. They're watching the fact that you only have certain foods for dinner, or don't, take a piece of cake if people go to a birthday party. Kids notice all of these things. Mm-hmm. And also, I think labeling foods as good or bad, junk food, is not great for kids. It's everything in moderation. Everyone needs a treat once in a while. There are foods that we have more often for dinner and for lunches, and then there's foods that we have more for treats, but all foods are good. And, teaching your kids that you can have all of those kinds of foods in moderation is way healthier approach and more of a protective factor against getting an eating disorder.
I have to say I'm glad to hear you say that, because that whole moderation piece I don't think is something we hear a lot about anymore. It's always, you've got to do this over that, and this is good and that is bad. It's, the two contrasts, as opposed to just what you said, everything in moderation, and that is such an important lesson.
Our bodies need fat. You know, our brains are lined with fat. Women need fat on their bodies to menstruate and to have babies and to do all of those important things that our bodies do. And so when you're teaching kids that a whole food group is bad, you introduce shame and guilt around food. And, you know, teaching someone to have a moderate diet, a kid to have all of the different food groups and enjoy food is a much healthier approach. And it's a protective factor against getting an eating disorder, because it's really that very black and white thinking, all good or all bad, that gets people tripped up. And when you apply that kind of thinking to your body, you then can get caught in this cycle of dieting, starting a diet, ending a diet. And we know that that puts you at a much higher risk for obesity than just accepting your own body's set point and sticking with that.
Now, you mentioned that you hear stories from different clients every day as part of your role in Sheena's Place. Can you tell us about Sheena's Place?
Sheena's Place is a wonderful center located right downtown Toronto. And we run groups for people suffering from an eating disorder. Many of the people that come to our center have struggled in the past or are currently struggling. We also have groups for friends and families and partners to come and get support if there is someone in their life with an eating disorder. And our groups run every night of the week, and we have different kinds of groups. We have skill building groups and support groups, art groups, and body image groups.
You mentioned support for basically the support circle of the person being affected by eating disorders, and that's something that often gets overlooked. We're so focused on the person who's struggling with whatever it is, bulimia or anorexia, we forget the parents, the guardians, that support circle. What advice can you offer people who may fall into that category about how to cope?
Well, I think getting support is an important first step. Sometimes it can be intimidating or feel very difficult to say that there's a problem and to come forward and ask for support. Sheena's Place is a really welcoming, warm environment. And we know that it's difficult. We know that families are struggling. We know that this is a tough issue to deal with and to confront. So we've got skilled facilitators that run the groups and are there to offer advice and support around how to cope. So I think getting some support is a key first step. And then really opening up dialogue in your family about what it is that's going on. Each person copes with this differently, and you know, our clients will tell you what helps. I think one thing that they consistently say is that being asked after every meal, did you eat that? You know, how are you doing? Are you better? Are you better yet? Is it gone yet? That doesn't help. I think asking them how they're doing helps. Asking them what you can do to be supportive helps, because as I say, some people are comfortable with more involvement from their family and some people are involved with less. But I think when your relationship gets to the point where all you ever ask the person about is their eating disorder, that can be detrimental. I think it makes people feel like they are just their eating disorder. And we know that this is not a person's entire identity. This is something that they're going through and they're coping with. But there are other parts of their personality and other parts of their identity that also need to be recognized and acknowledged.
Now, you recently had a breakfast to mark Sheena's Place's 12th anniversary, I guess, and Sophie Gregoire Trudeau was present for that, and she talks about the role of mentors in this whole equation. What would you say the role of a mentor is here?
Well, when you're suffering from an eating disorder, sometimes things can get difficult in the family. I think parents often have the role of refeeding the person if there's been significant weight loss, or trying to interrupt symptoms with bulimia. And sometimes this can cause relationships in the family to be a bit strained. So if you're in that situation and you're working through those things, finding an important mentor is very, very important. I think families have a very important role to play, but if your family isn't your support system, finding a mentor outside of your family is a very important step.
What can somebody who enters Sheena's Place for the first time expect?
Well, Sheena's Place is a charity, so we receive funds from our generous donors. Scotiabank is a wonderful, wonderful partner to us, and they give us lots of donations so that we can run our programs for free. And there's no waiting list for any of our programs. You can come and ask questions, get information about the group that you'd like to attend, and start that group the same night or the same week. And so we ask people to register for the groups, but that's the extent of the process. And as soon as you can come, you can get into a group.
That's absolutely reassuring to know that there is no waiting list. And the fact is that, eating disorders are something that you need help right away.
Absolutely. There's not a lot of treatment options in Toronto. The hospitals have really, seen drastic cutbacks in their funding and their spaces. So Sheena's Place offers a complement to traditional treatment where you can come and get support from other people who are going through the same thing, and learn about yourself, learn about the eating disorder, and find new ways to cope and to handle it.